All right, so today we're going to talk about more health and fitness stuff and brain training specifically. So today's topic is stories, is how the brain is wired for stories, how we always making up stories because the brain has to have it, and why Mark Twain once said, I am an old man and I have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened.
Oh God. Oh man.
So what do you think you meant by that?
I feel like he was talking about either one that he doesn't remember what he did or he made up the stories. It's like one or the other. So
It's
was
the
I did I
second.
get that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's the second one. He made up stories, and we all do. The
Yeah.
brain is wired for stories. That's why the most effective teachers, college professors, speakers tell stories to get their point across. There was a long period of human history where we didn't have written language, and things were passed down from generation to generation with stories. And you'll notice in the Bible, it's a big, thick storybook.
No, totally.
And so the brain has to have them. We're wired that way.
Yeah.
So if the brain doesn't get stories in, it'll make them up. And most of the stories most people make up are worst case scenarios.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, that's really good because stories like you're saying that you'll come up with something that is so terrible that might happen to you but might not happen. And that's really interesting because it's true. It's like when I am talking to someone, I'm trying to tell them what happened, you tell them a story. But then you're also thinking ahead of time in stories. So, just really cool.
Exactly. When I tell a story about my sister, your sister comes to mind.
Really?
When I tell a story about the house I grew up in, your brain goes to the house you grew up in. So that's another way teachers can be really effective getting points across. But when we're watching too much of mainstream media, that's stories, and they're usually awful. There's very few good feel-good stories and a whole bunch of crisis.
Yeah.
And so it puts us in crisis mode. Our mirror neurons, those were the neurons that I was describing when I said, when I tell a story about my sister, you think of yours. When I tell a story about my house, you think of yours. Your mirror neurons take over and do that. So when we see trauma on TV, we feel the trauma of what we're watching. And that's really unhealthy. Now, sometimes it's appropriate because we need to help people. But 99% of the bad news we hear and the stories we see aren't necessary. They're not good for us, they're bad for us. Because when we're put in that state, there's a lot of chemicals and hormones that are produced inside our body that make us less healthy and even fattening. A lot of those chemicals and hormones are fat storing chemicals and hormones. Now, when you go to the opposite end of the spectrum for mood, a lot of those are fat burning and metabolism boosting. So when you're in a great mood and your attitude is awesome and things are looking great, your metabolism is actually higher than when you're freaking out watching CNN.
Fearful.
Fearful, exactly. And a lot of people will say, well, the reason that I expect the worst is because then I'm not disappointed. And there's a point to that. I mean, I could see how that someone would say that and think that that might be an effective thing to do. But it's so not, because the brain doesn't actually know the difference between fantasy and reality. Neither does a toddler. Remember, we talked about the toddler brain, the subconscious brain. So when somebody is expecting the worst and creating that worst case scenario so they're not disappointed later, well, they're disappointed now because the brain doesn't know the difference between the story they just made up and experiencing that story. So they're going through that right now on a chemical and hormonal level, and with their toddler, they're putting their toddler through that, making it up in their head.
Yeah.
So when people catch themselves doing that, that's the first step.
And it's hard because it took me a really long time to get to that point, and I still have struggle with that every once in a while because you when you get in a negative state of mind, and sometimes you just wake up that way. All of a sudden it's just I don't know what happened. I just feel really like weird today, or like I'm just in a weird mood. And so you'll start telling yourself stories like, I don't think I can do this. And then thinking about what would happen if you didn't do this, like basically like going to work or being successful or all these different types of things, or going to the gym and working out. And you just say, oh, I'm always going to be heavy, or I'm always going to be this. And you kind of make up that story, right? But then you also can do it for the other side when you're feeling good. So it's just really cool. And it takes a long time to get to that point where you're not doing that. You can actually catch yourself and stop spiraling, like
Bingo.
we talked about before.
That's the spiral that's the problem.
Yeah, you're just out of control, and your thoughts are actually taking hold of you instead of you taking hold of your thoughts. So that first step is super pivotal, is figuring out, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. How can I stop it? So
Exactly. And I still do it, but I'm really good at catching myself, so it never spirals.
yeah.
And when I find myself telling a negative story, worst case scenario or whatever it is, I will stop myself and I'll say, that didn't happen. It's not happening now. And it's not going to happen in the future. It's just something crazy that I made up in my head. We all do it. We always will. No matter how strong or good or brain trained we are, it'll still happen. But the key is catching yourself, stopping it. And then the next thing I do is I make up the opposite story of what my brain just tried to feed me. And so polar opposite, now it's an awesome story, and I'll stay on that and spiral the other way and put myself in a really great mood because of this fake thing that I just made up in my head. Now I'm in a fat burning mode. I'm getting healthier because there are hormones and chemicals that are helping me get healthier. My brain is getting healthier because when you're stuck in a negative emotion or state or spiral, your brain actually starts eating away at itself. And if you did a brain scan on someone that's been really negative all their lives, we all know those people, it looks like holes in their brain. But super creative people that love what they do and love, the pillars of life are all set in place and they're really well balanced, their brains look amazing. It literally affects the very physiology of the brain, how it functions and how it looks, even on a scan.
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible. That's like part of the reasons why we talk about this brain training, is because our goal, obviously, here at the xgym is to get people physically healthy, but another part is being mentally healthy because, as you can see, just from what we're talking about, they go together. It all works together. And so if you don't have a healthy brain, you're just not going to be healthy physically either. And doing these kinds of things can actually help you get towards your health goals even faster.
Absolutely. Because the more you do this, making up really good stories, and they can be super funny, make you laugh, or they can be ridiculous in a good way. The toddler doesn't know that's fake. And so, like for instance, from a prosperity perspective, if someone thinks, oh geez, I can never pay my bills, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of money this week, you're not going to be able to do this or that, blah blah blah, and they start to tell all those things. So instead, if they just thought, abundance is coming to me now from all directions, and a year from now this is going to be my situation, wow, this is fun, and maybe put some funny stuff in there so you laugh. You can change your state with imaginary stories.
Yeah, it's imagery. You're creating a vision inside of your mind.
Bingo. And that's the best way to drive it to your subconscious, because the language of your subconscious, your toddler, is images and emotions. So anything that you can make really emotional with lots of word mental pictures, it's going to drive it in there. And the more you tell yourself that story, the more likely your subconscious is to adopt the story as its own. So the toddler takes over. And once the toddler takes over, it makes it happen. Because the toddler's in charge, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, it is.
We just have to train that toddler to do what we need it to do.
And for those of you that haven't watched this before, or watched our podcast or YouTube, the toddler is the subconscious brain. It's what is on at all times when you're not even thinking about it. So it's the input that's going into your mind. That's what your toddler sees all the time, even when you don't see it. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the toddler. And the reason we call it a toddler is because it throws fits, right? It like does all these different types of things that you don't want to do. It's that emotional side of your brain instead of the logical side of your brain, or at least for the most part, that's what it does, is creates problems for you. But you can train it, right?
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Anything that we do to teach our toddler that works on a 3-year-old works also on the subconscious brain.
Right.
And repetition is good, but what's better is emotion and images. So that's why stories are so effective. And repeating those stories, because just like any habit, the more that we repeat it with the image and emotion, the more permanent and faster it's going to be programmed in. When you first learned to drive, you had to think about everything you did. But now you can drive home and you're like, oh, how did I get here? I don't even remember.
It's automatic.
Yeah, it's automatic. Same with this. So, and you did that through repetition, but you also did that through emotion because you're really excited to drive and learn. And you're taking in lots of images, stop signs, stop lights. And so you did it without knowing you were doing it. But now we're talking about a technique where you're just doing it consciously. You're making the decision to do it. Now you know how the brain codes stuff and learns stuff and takes over stuff automatically. So now we're just talking about how to do that in a mindful, purposeful way. Also, once you have created that great scenario and stopped yourself thinking of the bad scenarios, if a bad scenario does happen, you're way better equipped to handle that scenario because of the state you're in. Whereas those people out there who say, oh, well, no, it's good because when I think negative, then I'm not going to be disappointed. Well, A, if you're thinking negative all the time, you can manifest that. And then those people always also often say, see, I told you. Well, yeah, you made it happen because you kept thinking that way. So your toddler took over and made it happen. But even if it happens something else or the same thing by random chance that's negative, they are not equipped to handle it, even though they even expected it to happen.
Right.
They're not equipped because they're in a crummy state. But the person who's in a good state all the time, something bad happens, they're like, oh, all right. That story of this is, it was on a bus in South America, and there were a bunch of tourists, and the bus just conked out. They're in the middle of nowhere. And hardly any water. People had to go to the bathroom. And they're like, wow. And so everybody's freaking out. And the driver's like, I don't know what's going on. And I don't know when someone can get to us. Because, it's a very backcountry road. And we might have to just hike for miles or who knows what's going on. And so within the first 3 minutes, most of the people on the bus were freaking out. Except for this one guy who was remaining calm. And people are like, what's your problem? Why are you so calm? And what are you thinking about this? And he goes, well, certainly inconvenient. He had a completely different perspective on this whole thing. For him, it was a minor inconvenience. For everybody else, the world is ending. Their toddlers took over. He maintained control with his PFC. He had a completely different experience, and that's the guy that figured out what to do and how to get everybody out of the situation. So we're better equipped when bad stuff does happen, when we're not expecting it, and we're not creating that worst case scenario, thinking that will equip us better.
Yeah, when you start little like that, when you're tweaking your mind, and then big scenarios like you're talking about, those do happen. Because a lot of people are like, well, how do I practice that? Like, how do I practice a big scenario happening? Or how do I practice breaking my fear cycle? Or just different things like that. And it just starts so small.
Bingo.
It's just by turning your thoughts around. And that can be really tough. But if you're self-aware and you're really thinking about it and you're making an effort to actually make it happen, then like you said, those bigger things that come along, once you've trained yourself, you'll be able to get through those with more ease, if not complete ease, just like you were talking about. So it's just really impactful and super important for people to try to do this, because The other thing too is it gives you your control back. It's not just about fitness and health. It's about feeling like you have control over your own life and your own thoughts, and not feeling like everything is a meltdown every time a little thing happens. It's about emotional intelligence, and this is what that's helping you gain. But then it has so many other benefits to your life. It'll make you have a more positive outlook on your life. It'll make you fitter. It'll make you healthier. There's just so many reasons why to do this. And that just leads me into like taking the brain type test and learning what's going to work best for you. But this little technique that you're talking about is just huge.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, and people can find out their superpowers. This is one of over 30 brain training techniques that are available. But how people find out their specific superpower brain training techniques is going to braintype.me. Braintype.me. It's not braintypeme.com. It's braintype.me. And then people can take the test and get their at least top 6 brain training techniques for their particular brain wiring that are going to make the most sense to them, and to find their superpowers. A lot of people get 2 results. They get 2 types because there's a primary and a secondary for most people. And that primary is more who you are at home, and the secondary is your adapted style, who you are at work, or whatever you feel like you need to be adapted for. A lot of computer programmers that work from home have one type. They don't need an adapted style. Or really strong personalities have one type. But people like me, who are naturally an introvert, but have found an occupation in an extroverted world, have 2 types. Have our Bev, my wife, has one type because she's the same way all the time. She doesn't have to be different. It's not that you're trying to be different. It's sometimes you have to be. I have to be. I can't be an introvert when I'm at work training people and working with people. But her extroverted personality is suitable for both. So she just comes in with one. She's retaken it, and she's always one. And sometimes it changes slightly. Sometimes she's the developer, and sometimes she's the overseer, which are pretty similar brain types, both very extroverted, but it's just the one.
How funny.
Yeah.
That's great, though. Yeah, I mean, when you're extroverted, oftentimes it's not every time because it's just different from person to person, and that's why you need to take it to figure that out. But even when you're extroverted, sometimes you can have introverted qualities. And sometimes when you're introverted, you can have extroverted qualities. So it's just really important to take that and see what you're going to get, because it's just going to help you in every area of your life, whether it's health, fitness, or just having control over your brain.
Yep, exactly. And rewiring it to make yourself a better person. That
too. That's super important. I think a lot of people are looking to do that, and this is definitely a way to do that.
Yeah, and as far as health and fitness is concerned, it's not just to be a better person, but reduce the need for willpower. So if you find it easier to eat right, and easier to exercise, and easier to make healthy choices instead of battling your toddler
all the time.
So you're reprogramming your toddler with these superpowers.
Yep, that's really, really awesome. I love that.
Just a huge shortcut. Way faster, way easier.
Yeah, because willpower is like something that even I struggle with like sugar, for example. So these kind of brain training techniques, when you're using them, like you're saying, and you're just making it easier for you down the road when you're trying to. So it's just little by little. And then eventually you'll just be able to completely not even worry about it. Yeah.
Bingo. Right on.
Bazinga.
That's all I have to say about that.
And that's all I have to say about that.